One. Hey everybody, at the HorrorHound virtual convention, welcome Mr. Adam Wingard for Kong versus Godzilla or Godzilla versus Kong, depending on who's your favorite, because I know how I say it. And so Adam, thank you so much for coming today and being a part of this. We really are excited about this movie. It's part of our latest issue, and surprise guys, if you didn't know, there is a mini poster from the movie in this issue for you all, so we're really excited about that too. It's gorgeous. Also congrats on Face Off, because that was the first movie I ever saw on a date with my husband.
Oh, wow. That's really awesome.
Yeah, I am very excited about that.
It's a good way to start things, you know?
Oh yeah, I think so. I hope you get a Joe Bob Briggs cameo in there. We kind of
I love
need
him in that movie. It's so great when he just shows up. You're like, wait, is that Joe Bob Briggs? Wait, that couldn't be. Wait, it is. All right.
It is. Well, thank you so much for being here again. So my first question off is, what was your reaction when you saw the internet's reaction to the trailer when it hit? Because it was huge.
Yeah, no, it was really amazing. I actually had no expectations, you know, like it was just like another kind of day. And I remember waking up early that morning and being like, oh yeah, the trailer is finally going to drop today. You know, that should be kind of cool. You know, I thought maybe I would, see, some people talking about it in the morning, and, and that would be that. But as soon as it dropped, I just, I started seeing just like almost immediately within like half an hour, people were already posting reaction videos. And so what my day ended up being is I ended up just watching reaction videos for the whole day. And because they just kept getting more and more enthusiastic. And it was just so energizing for me to see, because, I've been on this film since, like I really started working on it in 2017. And so it's been such a long run, and, and it got delayed because of the coronavirus. And, so it just felt like, for a while, it just felt like there was no end in sight. And we couldn't talk about the movie, and nobody could see anything from it. And, and I was also constantly getting bombarded online about like, where's the trailer? And it was kind of like, well, it's coming at some point, but that's not really up to me. And then it dropped, and yeah, it was amazing to see. It was like one of the best days I've ever had as a filmmaker, was just watching people's excited reactions to what we did.
I think I probably watched it 10 times that day. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna lie. I think it was a big, beautiful thing that we have been waiting for, and we needed that.
Oh yeah, and like when you're making a movie like this, like when I first got on, I was so excited, and I like sat down and I watched every Godzilla movie in order, from the very beginning to the newest ones, and did the same thing with the King Kong movies. But once you start actually working into a movie like this, you kind of become desensitized to it. It's like there'd be a few times, like for instance, like when we were at editorial, and a friend of mine might come and visit, or have to sign an NDA and all that kind of stuff, and they'd come in there, and I'd be walking them through editorial, and in the background you can hear like a Godzilla roar going off, and that's so casual to us, when we're working on it. But when people come in there, it's like suddenly they hear it and their eyes go wide, and it's like, that's Godzilla, and you're like, oh yeah, that's Godzilla, come on over here, we're gonna, but so whenever the trailer actually dropped, that's one of those things. Again, it was like another one of those like jolts. It's like, oh yeah, like this thing that we've been working on, for so long, it's like people haven't seen any of this. They haven't had the simple pleasure of watching Godzilla take a strong punch to the jaw from King Kong, and that there's something just so simplistically appealing about that. And but when you're in the weeds of it, it's just another day at the office.
Yeah, and then everybody cries. And they're like, this is finally happening. So kind of on point with that, I am curious, what is a writer's room for a film like this like for you and for the writers? Because I read some quotes from a couple of the writers on the project, and they were like, "We started the writer's room, and we're together in here, and we're making this crazy film, and we're working with these iconic creatures." What is it like to do that in a writer's room for a movie like this one?
For the process on this one, that the actual writer's room was probably the only thing that happened before I came on board. So Terry Rossio, who wrote the first draft of the script, first two drafts, I should say, was the one running the writer's room. And so through the writer's room, they basically kind of broke the story a bit, you know, or, you know, in a good way, not like actually like down. But, you know, they basically figured out like a broad overview of the story. So they broke it down into I think it was just a couple page outline. And so when I came on board, that outline existed. And then Terry and I sat down for, you know, a couple writing sessions where we just like, Terry has this great strategy in terms of breaking down a script, is that, you know, here's the outline. And then what we did is we took a couple whiteboards in a boardroom over at Legendary Studios, and we would just note card every scene out, you know, and so filled up two or three of these big whiteboards, and just kind of like, it allowed us to go through every scene and talk it through, and get into even more detail than the outline had, which they did a great job in the writer's room, just coming up with like amazing set pieces and that kind of thing. And a lot of those actually, you know, stayed through all the different drafts we did. But I think the most important phase of the writing, at least at that level, or when I came on board, was when we note carded the film, and not just talked about like what we liked and didn't like, but kind of got into more of the nitty gritty details about, you know, what we needed to actually accomplish these scenes. And I was able to put more and more of my director spin on it right away before he went to draft, which was really important, you know.
Nice. And yeah, that's a cool insight. I like hearing about how you were able to put your kind of take and your style, because you've got a very great style into there before it hits the script. That's cool. So kind of again, kind of along those lines, I'm curious, because you've got creatures that have never existed, and they've got their own personalities, they've got their own emotions, and you know, I make no bones about the fact that Kong makes me bawl.
Mm-hmm.
He just, and this film, just absolutely beautiful. He's alive, you know, it's just gorgeous. And Godzilla as well, there's moments in this where you give them a personality and emotion that's just fantastic. How do you do that as a director, and just as a fan as well, but as a director, how do you create that with the special effect?
Well, I mean, for me, it's just about, you know, it's just about like kind of knowing that that's what you want out of it, I think, to a certain degree, because like the big turning point for me in terms of developing the movie was whenever I watched both 1976 King Kong and the Godzilla versus Destroya from I think it was 95. And you know, with the King Kong, and you know, when I watched that one, like that one's a little bit more straightforward, because you know, I was watching it with my girlfriend at the time, and she was the type of person who never got emotional during movies ever. I never saw her get emotional once. But at the end of that film, whenever, you know, they're shooting up Kong, and it goes on forever, it's really upsetting in that film.
It is.
It is, yeah. And I remember like as that's going on, I was getting emotional, and then I looked over at her, and her eyes were like, tears were streaming down, and she said, "He's dead already, stop." And at that point I knew, it was like, wow, this is like, this character just somehow resonates with people in this sort of instinctual way for whatever reason. I mean, there's a lot of reasons going into it, but the more interesting one for me, because that one's kind of a 1-2. It's like, we love Kong, he gets shot, he dies, that's sad, you know. But the weird one for me was Godzilla versus Destroya, where, you know, I'm on this like like I said, I started watching from the very beginning of the Godzilla series all the way to the end. So I just sat down for a couple days straight, you know, with coffee and just like, you know, went right through all those movies. And so, you know, when you're at Godzilla versus Destroya, if you're watching these all in order, you've watched a lot of Godzilla movies at that point, you know. And so I'm a little bit like, you know, kind of running low, you know, like it's like I'm really enjoying myself, but you know, the Showa era are really my favorite ones, and you know, you're well past that at that point, you know.
Yeah.
But it gets to the end of Godzilla versus Destroya, and that Akira Ifukube music starts playing, and you know, it's that whole sequence where like Junior dies and Godzilla's sad and stuff, and you know, and it's not like that movie looks like so different than the other ones. I think it's like one of the coolest looking Godzilla movies, but it's still like the old school style. But that one, like something about the way the music works at the end of that, and the fact that like it was almost like Toho at that point was, you know, that movie's almost like a, you know, a goodbye, a funeral for Godzilla, and so it kind of has this like full nostalgic throwback to it. And I just remember like kind of half invested in it in the first half of the film, and then whenever it starts getting emotional at the end, you know, I started just getting totally sucked in, and I was just like, I found myself like my eyes were tearing up, you know, and it was the music and all that stuff that really got me. And so when I saw that, I was like, you know, that's so important to these movies, is, you know, to make a long story short, is like you gotta really you gotta draw people into these monsters as characters, and you gotta really find the beauty in them and the way that they inhabit the worlds, because you know, the nostalgia factor isn't just like cheap nostalgia. It's like, this is a nostalgia that's about the history of cinema. I mean, like that's what these monsters represent. You know, they're the beginning of special effects spectacles. They're a beginning of, you know, like all the things that people love about mainstream cinema nowadays. It's like this is the origin place, King Kong and Godzilla. And you know, so for me it was like, you know, that was always a thrust, and how you get there and the details of that is very complicated, but that was where the origin of it came from.
So, kind of along those lines, because you kind of, this is a nice flow to this question, which is the metaphor is kind of the legacy of these movies, of what Godzilla represents, of what Kong represents, because Kong is nature and man sort of destroying it. And then with Godzilla, it's, you know, again, man meddling with nature and kind of creating a monster. Can you talk about getting that in here and continuing that, because that's such an important part of it. And with these films, I really love how the legendary series and the MonsterVerse kind of, it always continues this and makes it in such a beautiful way.
Yeah, well, and I think that's what's interesting about this movie is the fact that my perception of Godzilla and King Kong is that they're both protectors. You know, I think Godzilla's very much the protector of the entire planet, and Kong has, you know, generally been a protector of Skull Island. And I think up until this film, they've kind of respected each other's distances. Maybe something about Skull Island, you know, protected Kong from being on Godzilla's radar and that kind of thing. But that's kind of what's cool about them, is that they're kind of two heroes that have the same general goal in mind. And this movie's about kind of playing off of that, and ultimately, you know, both of them feel like they're in charge. You know, they're both the apex predators. They're both the alpha dogs. So, you know, there's going to be some problems whenever, you know, you get that kind of thing in the mix.
Well, and you brought up the 1970s Kong, which it was that was a huge like thing about, you know, oil refiner, you know, finding oil and trying to take that, and then they end up bringing Kong, and it's sort of like nature gets its revenge on you for plundering itself. And I really love that movie because it just hits all the right notes. And this
Yeah, well, and this movie has I think a really strong message. It's not exactly that one, but there's definitely a you know, a nature versus technology kind of aspect to it. And you know, but those kind of things are kind of harder to explain until people actually see the movie.
We can't talk about it. We'll get in trouble. So you had brought this up before about the music, and I that's one thing the themes and Godzilla's theme, which is just so powerful. Can you talk about the importance of the music in this film and how it just
Yeah,
perfectly
absolutely.
goes along with it?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that, like, whenever I was first hired onto this, I was so excited to try to, you know, put my stamp on it. Not just in the score, but I was also excited about like what kind of, um, you know, actual songs and things can we potentially make work into this thing, you know, because at the end of the day, it's like this is a really fun movie, and we wanted the soundtrack to reflect that. Um, but yeah, I mean, like this, I would say this was the first movie that I've ever had that's like, you know, a real kind of, you know, big orchestral score. And obviously, like, I wanted to try to find ways to combine that with electronic music. And originally, like, my original instinct was I wanted to get this artist, Makeup and Vanity Set, who actually has a song in the movie, to score the film. But at the time, he just didn't have enough credits, and I couldn't convince the studio to let me bring him on. So I was really happy I was at least able to get one of his songs in the film. But you know, whenever we started looking, it was like there was really nobody I considered, you know, over Junkie. I mean, like Junkie XL, like Tom Hulkenberg, like we just hit it off right away. As soon as I met him, it just felt like, you know, this guy really, he's such a super fan of Godzilla movies, especially. And we just hit it off in that regard. And, you know, I just made it really clear to him that I really wanted a score that had a bit of that synth wave quality that, you know, if you've seen any of my other movies, you know, a lot of, you know, especially The Guest, and you know, has that kind of quality to it. And, you know, and I wanted to bring that, because for me, it's like, when you're doing a movie like this, it's like there's a version that could just be made by anybody. It's a big monster movie. You know, the spectacle itself is going to be cool enough, and, you know, and so if you wanted to, these films could be on autopilot. But what I like about what the MonsterVerse and Legendary does is they pick directors that have a strong kind of singular vision, and wants to push these things in new arenas. So, you know, when it came to like my approach to it, it was like, you know, how can I bring that kind of like cool synthwave, you know, kind of vibe to it. I mean, some of my first images I even had in my head, as soon as I knew that there was going to be a Godzilla versus Kong movie, before I even talked to them, I just immediately was like, oh my God, I would love to see Godzilla and King Kong in a like super futuristic neon city, you know, fighting it out with some electronic music playing. And, you know, and of course, that's exactly where we ended up going to get the movie. But yeah, so the only thing about the music that I have like really regrets on is that when it came time to record all the orchestral pieces, that was like right when the pandemic hit. And so like it was like 2 weeks before, or it was going to be 2 weeks after whenever the pandemic hit. And so they ended up canceling our trips to go watch. We were going to be watching it in, you know, the full orchestra play in London.
Man.
And so they ended up having to do that kind of thing, which a lot of movies have done during the pandemic, which is you have to record each individual musician and then, you know, frame it together. And, you know, and ultimately the sound that you get is basically the same. I mean, you can't tell that it wasn't all just recorded live, but, you know, I just didn't get to have that full experience that I wanted of just sitting in a room and listening to people play.
Like a live hitting you in the face while your movie plays.
Exactly.
Oh man, that's a bummer. So one thing I wanted to add, there's a couple of things I had to ask you, and then we're going to have a couple fan questions. But one thing was, I really wanted to ask you, if you came back to do another movie, I kind of have an idea of what you're going to answer, but after talking to you just now, but which of the kaiju would you like to pair up in a sequel? If you had your pick, you get to be the guy that picks the monsters?
Well, you know,